Hey, hello, and welcome to the Feel Strong Fitness Podcast. My name is Justin McClintock, and this week we have Francesca Tindall on. She is a nutrition coach, powerlifter, and the owner of Mere Nutrition. Francesca, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Justin. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I thought this was, I suspect, valuable for a lot of people out there, but I think we should lay the groundwork first. You do
Okay.
sport strength-specific nutrition, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Could you explain what that means to people who might not understand?
Yeah. So, as a strength athlete, whether that be a power lifter, Olympic weightlifter, strongman athlete, there's specific nutrition strategies that need to be utilized when you're looking at performance and really maximizing that. So, of course, we deal with the regular basic nutrition stuff because that is the foundation of any sort of weight gain, weight loss, performance. So we take care of that. But there's also an additional component of, whether or not we're making weight for a competition or just truly maximizing the athletic performance aspect of it. There are certain things that strength athletes have to be mindful of and incorporate in order to get that sort of result, and the result being just better performance. So not only are we dealing with basic nutrition that applies to everybody, but strength athletes do have to kind of take it a step further if they really want to excel in their sport.
What are some things that are specific to strength athletes that you might not necessarily suggest for a layperson, even someone who's pretty active, likes exercising, but thereafter general health function, longevity, capacity, not I want to, like in your sport, squat, deadlift, and bench press as much as I possibly can?
So the biggest thing is going to be nutrient timing. That's not really applicable to the layperson. I mean, it really doesn't matter when you eat in relation to your workouts. You kind of just eat when you're hungry, when it fits in your schedule. But for athletes, it's really important to time that pre and post workout meal appropriately. That way we can have enough fuel for the training as well as the recovery aspect. So that's really number one. Number two would be intra-workout nutrition. Not every athlete needs it. It just depends on how rigorous their training is, how long their training is. But we often end up utilizing that in order to sustain that energy throughout training. And then at the very top, we have supplements. And supplements is like the icing on the cake, even for athletes. But those are definitely not anything that somebody who's working out for general health and fitness necessarily needs. I mean, sure, there's a couple that will benefit everybody, but for the most part, supplements really aren't as important for somebody with general health and fitness goals versus somebody who's an athlete.
That makes perfect sense. Digging into the training a little bit more, could you make a distinction between like a competitive endurance athlete and a competitive strength athlete?
Yeah.
They both probably need intra-workout nutrition. They both are making a lot of trade-offs. What's different for them?
So the biggest difference is the amount of carbs and how you fuel for strength versus endurance. So with endurance, you definitely want to carb load the day before, because endurance, you're tapping into those long storage areas in your body for that sustained energy. When we're talking about strength, our workouts are it's not endurance, right? You're working for maybe like a minute and then you take a rest and then you go back
Even
for a
if you
minute.
do more
take a
than
rest.
5 squats, it isn't endurance.
Okay. More than 5 reps. we're getting to the gray area for powerlifters. But as a strength athlete, you're tapping into your glycogen stores mainly, and that's quick energy. So with strength athletes, the main source of energy is going to come before your workout. So if you are really low on carbs before your workout, whether it be right before or just if you're working out at the end of the day, the earlier part of the day, you're going to feel that because we want that quick energy. With endurance athletes, they need to start thinking about fueling the night before. So if they're going to go on, say, like a 5-mile run, they need to think about their last meal of the day because that is going to help fuel their run the following day. Of course, they're still doing, a pre-workout meal, they're still doing intra-workout nutrition, but that's the main difference. It's how long in advance you're thinking about your training and your fueling.
So it's sort of another aspect of that timing protocol.
Yes.
I think the weight class thing is really interesting, and most strength sports have weight classes at this point. I haven't competed in strongman for a long time. There were strongman stuff that didn't have any weight classes, and there were strongman stuff that had like really big weight classes. But most certainly powerlifting, Olympic lifting, things like that also have weight classes, and there's always a tension there. I've found between making a person as strong as they can be, but they have to weigh X on competition day. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So you are correct with strongman. There are definitely weight classes now across the board, but they're a lot bigger than your powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting weight classes. So you have a lot more wiggle room to be able to, fit into a weight class. So for strongman athletes, I've found that the ones that I work with, it's really just more maximizing their performance rather than making weight because the weight classes are so large that for the vast majority of them, they're comfortably sitting in a weight class anyway. So we're not really doing too much of weight manipulation there. For my power lifters and my Olympic weightlifters, that's a whole different story because you do have to pick a weight class. And most people are like right in between two of them. And then they have to pick, do I want to cut down or do I want to bulk up or just stay where you're at, So the biggest thing that I tell athletes first is figure out where your body is most comfortable because there's no reason in cutting down if it's going to affect your performance, if it's going to affect your life, affect your mood. Like that's not, you're throwing the competition to the wind, right? Like we're not going to be effective there. So that's the first thing is where do you normally kind of sit as far as weight? If you normally like, for example, me, if I don't track, if I'm just kind of doing about my thing, I'm usually between 135 to 140. But that's not where I comfortably like to be. I feel a little overweight at that point. I feel a little bit sluggish in the gym. So for me, like the 130 to 135 is better. And I compete in the 60 kilo, which is 132.2 is the cutoff. So when I do a cut, for me, it's very small. It's like 2 pounds. And currently I'm actually underweight, so I wouldn't even have to cut right now.
Mhm.
So you really walk that fine line. And this is kind of where, we're talking about nutrition for strength sports versus even nutrition for endurance sports or, the layperson, where it really matters because we need to make weight. Often that is cutting, but in a way that it doesn't affect performance. And there's a lot of strategy that goes into that because your quick weight cuts, your quick water cuts are not it. they actually impede performance a lot. So yeah, that's the number one thing is find out where you're comfortable and then go from there. And then if you're trying to be more competitive, you have to look at then everybody in your weight class and who you normally, compete against and what events you want to go to and figure out where you fall. And at the end of the day, I always tell my athletes, the sport is you against you, right? Like, yes, you're competing against others. You want to place first. You want to be the best. You want to break records. But at the end of the day, like, if you're PRing your own lifts, you're still progressing in the sport. And where you kind of fall in there, it just give it time. The open class is very competitive. Once you get submasters, masters, it's a different ball game. So I always remind athletes of that. Like, it's just you against you. So if you want to perform your best, this is the best way forward for you.
That's always such a tough mindset I've found to help people with, where it's keep your eyes on your own work. We're just going to maximize your performance and hit our weight class. Amongst other things, you don't have any control over who's showing up on that day. Even
That's
if you've
right.
been in the sport for a while, you're in a league or a division or whatever that you're very familiar with. I'm sure you've had this where you look at the
Mhm.
12 people in your session and 10 of them, they've been at the last 10 meets. You kind of know what they are and what they're going to bring. You don't know
Mhm.
who's going to be there. You don't know who got hurt.
Yeah,
You don't know who's had all kinds of other changes. So, and there's nothing you can do to affect their performance
exactly.
ethically. Keep your eyes on your own
Yeah,
work. Will make you as great as you can be, and then see what happens on the day.
exactly. Yeah.
The You mentioned that the trade-off of um, playing around with weight classes can really be challenging for people. There's some big trade-offs, some potential like social life trade-offs, health trade-offs, happiness trade-offs, mood trade-offs. I have, especially with newer lifters, have found that they try and rush there very quickly. Like meet
Hmm.
number one or meet number two, they're trying relatively extreme things to fit themselves into a class when they don't even know what it's like to be judged on the day. Does this sound familiar to you?
Yeah, absolutely. That I think it's kind of a culture that we've created, we as athletes have created over time, where everybody talks about cutting, right? I'm going to make weight for a meet. Nobody talks about just competing where they're at. Like, and it's even fewer people that talk about bulking into a class, to maximize muscle mass and maximize performance. We always hear about the cut. Oh, the cut didn't go the way that I wanted to. Oh, I didn't make weight, right? So new lifters are just coming into this sport hearing all of these, I need to make weight, I need to make weight. And that's what they think that they need to do. But yeah, I agree. Like as a new lifter, you should just compete where you're at. Like, don't even worry about weight classes because there's so much that goes into a meet that your weight class is the last thing you want to worry about. Like the meets are run a certain way. Like you said, you're judged to a certain standard. And there's a lot of pressure for a new athlete to take in like an 8 hour meet day, much less trying to, the stress of trying to make weight. So yeah, that's definitely not something. I mean, we're talking about after you have, I would say, 2, 3 meets under your belt and you kind of see who you're competing against, where you kind of fall in the ranking, then we can talk about, okay, am I more competitive in a lower weight class? Should I bulk up? Should I maximize where I'm currently at? So, yeah, weight is definitely something that can hinder you as an athlete if you put too much focus on it.
100%. And in general, smaller, lighter people are weaker than bigger
Mhm.
people. That's
Yeah.
just how it works. So if your focus is always on making yourself smaller, you should accept that that is going to come with being potentially weaker than you could potentially be.
Yep. I started out as back in USAPL when they had the 57 kilo class.
Mhm.
So for my very first meet, I did cut down, but I was like my home situation. I did not go out to eat. I cooked all my meals. Like there was no reason why I couldn't focus on just eating healthier. And honestly, it got to the point where I just ate, lots of fruits and vegetables, got my protein in, and the weight just kind of fell off. And I was actually underweight like a week before the meet. And I'm like, okay, I need to start eating because I didn't want to get, to be too small. I wanted to be just within that weight class. And yeah, now since I started powerlifting, I've had a child and I've naturally kind of gone up in my weight classes. I did compete in the 67.5 kilo class after about a year after I had my son. And then over time, and he's about to be 7. So, you can kind of see the time frame. I am now in the 60 kilo class, but there's no way that I'm going to be now it's the 56 kilo class. There is no way. Like I would lose so much, not only muscle mass, but so much performance to try to get back down there. So, people have to kind of realize that your weight classes might change over time in the sport, and that's totally okay.
And sometimes they also change the weight classes. These are
Yep.
divisions on a surprisingly regular basis, I found. And sometimes this
Mhm.
drips down from international, where people have their weight classes and then everyone gets an email on the same day. Oh, that weight class doesn't exist anymore. We're moving it
Mhm.
a couple of kilos this way and a couple of kilos this way, and we're getting rid of this one altogether. Oh, okay. The landscape just
Yeah.
shifted under me again.
Exactly. And then what, right?
understanding that um, there's too much emphasis on cutting, I feel like would be doing a disservice to people if we don't describe kind of generally how you would recommend someone cut for a competitive meet. Someone is already working with you, they're committed. Let's say that they've done a couple of meets, they're pretty solid that they know which weight class they should be in to perform their best. They're you tell me, but there's some amount of time out from the meet. What's your approach?
So, first and foremost, I always have to say this: it's always individualized, right? The way that one person cuts is not going to be the same way that somebody else cuts. And I'm going to use water cuts as an example because it varies so much. For myself, I could generally only cut about 2 pounds of water. Doesn't matter how much I load and cut, how many hot bath sauna sessions. I do not carry a whole lot of water weight on a normal basis. So about 2 pounds is what I can get out of water cut. I have athletes, and it's generally males, taller males. I have two athletes who can easily cut 15 pounds of water and not sweat it, right? So the approach is going to be totally individualized depending on, how somebody's body reacts to water cuts, to dieting. But as a general rule of thumb, I say 12 weeks out. When you're 12 weeks out, you should start looking at your nutrition because 12 weeks is a pretty good time to get a good amount of weight off. I'm always for doing a slower cut because we have performance at the forefront, and that is what we are aiming at. Yes, we're trying to, get you down to a weight class, but if that's going to sacrifice performance, what's the point? So looking at things 12 weeks out gives us a good time frame to get a good plan going. And then if needed, and depending on how somebody sheds water, we may or may not do a water cut the last week. I don't love to do water cuts with my athletes unless necessary and unless I know that they can cut water without performance. But there is research out there that shows just as little as a 2% drop in body water can severely affect your athletic performance. So, it's just, to me, it's not worth it. It's not worth jeopardizing performance and injury, right? To be able to fit yourself into a particular number.
Yeah, I
And then,
completely agree.
yeah, and then based on how much weight the athlete has to lose, we'll kind of decide at that 12-week mark, okay, should we continue with the current plan now and then maybe start cutting back at week 8 or week 6? It just depends on how much weight they have to lose. And, generally how they lose weight. Some people have a harder time losing weight than others. Somebody can, skip one meal and lose 5 pounds. So it's just totally dependent on the individual.
Yeah, that makes sense. And an important aspect, I think, of giving them that much time, giving them 12 weeks, is it's enough time for things to not go perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
You can play with
Exactly. Yeah.
protocols for a couple of weeks and say, oh, actually, this isn't moving as fast as we wanted it to. We're going to change some dials a little bit. Oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
moving fast enough, but your performance is tanking. We need to make some adjustments and maybe make some decisions about what we're going to change going forward, as opposed to the 10 days out. Oh my goodness, I'm 8 to 15 pounds up. What am I going
Mm-hmm.
to do? And that, in my experience, is when athletes uh,
Yep.
go rogue, suddenly disappear and stop talking to you about their nutrition and show up underweight, but also looking like a skeleton and performing terribly, which is the worst trade off. Like, oh, so we trained for 9 months and
Right.
you you ruined it in the last 3 days because you didn't feel like planning your nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the one thing that I always preach to athletes is start early. Start with your nutrition early. A lot of people don't think that, and I think the culture is slowly changing. But traditionally, a lot of people didn't put a whole lot of emphasis, and by people, I'm talking about strength athletes, a whole lot of emphasis on nutrition because it's the training, right? Like, well, I'm still PRing my lifts, I'm still doing this. And with my athletes, I go beyond nutrition. I literally coach everything but the training portion because when we're talking about recovery, there's even more that goes into that, right? Yes, it's nutrition, but it's also stress management. It's also good sleep hygiene. There's so much more. And I have found with my athletes, life can be happening. And that is the reason why their nutrition might be a little off. Like I chatted with one of my athletes about 2 weeks ago, and she's like, I am just having a hard time meeting my macros. Like, I just have no appetite. And we started talking about things, and the issue was not her nutrition at all. It was her stress, which was causing her not to eat and not to hit her macros. And once we fixed the stress, she's like, oh, yeah, I feel like I'm back on track. I feel fine. Like, so people need to start realizing that when we're talking about strength, performance, recovery, it's not just what you do at the gym. It's usually what you do outside of the gym that is the source of either good performance or bad performance.
100%. The Sometimes we like to say around here that you can only train as hard as you can recover, and because that's where we get strong. Everyone has
Yeah,
had the experience of a long training set, and you are so much weaker at the end of it. You're dog tired, you can't move anything, you're done. Training literally made you weaker. It's the recovery that makes you stronger. And if you are
exactly.
not focusing on that, whether it's sleep, diet, stress, all of the above, it doesn't matter how beautiful the program is or how much you want it or how loud the metal music is, it's not going to get you there.
Exactly. Yeah, people underestimate the power of proper recovery for their performance.
You mentioned part of your cutting strategy, if you were going to implement a water cut, and ideally not, but knowing to what degree an athlete could lose, how well that would work for them. That says to me that you're probably practicing some other time, or like doing a rehearsal cut some other time to see how this protocol works away from the most important time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, with most of my athletes that I work with have usually done a water cut on their own at some point in the past before coming to me. So they can speak to, yeah, I generally can do a water cut and lose X amount of weight. For those that have never done one before, we do a trial ahead of time because I want to see, are they a water retainer or not, right? Because I can look at myself and know that I'm not, and can look at somebody else and know that they are. And unless you've done a water cut, you will not really know where you stand. So we do a trial run. Usually it's in the off season. We'll just take a week and we're like, okay, let's ramp up your water, cut it, and see where your body's at. We can also do stuff like sauna or hot baths, which is something that we do on the back end if we're like super close and we need to just shed a little bit of water. The other thing that I really take a look at when we're doing water cuts is electrolytes. Um, I've been doing a lot of chatting on electrolytes recently on my Instagram, and it's because a lot of athletes will utilize it, and I have found that sometimes they don't know why they're taking electrolytes. They're just like, well, I train so that, you know what I mean? So I'm supposed to take electrolytes. But they don't realize that when we are in that water cutting period, if you're taking electrolytes, you are literally fighting against what you're trying to do because the number one electrolyte that you're taking in is sodium. And where sodium goes, water follows. So if you have sodium in your body, guess what you're retaining? A bunch of water. So when we're doing a water cut, the first thing I'll ask athletes is, are you taking electrolytes? And if they are, I cut them out. The last week before competition is shouldn't be heavy. You should not be working your tail off to, be sweating all of this sodium off. So you don't really need it. You know what I mean? Like, get to your weigh in, and then we can talk about rehydration and talk about reincorporating the sodium back in.
I think that leads really nicely into different weigh-in strategies and to what degree people might understand them. A lot of divisions and groups have gone to same-day weigh-ins. Olympic lifting is pretty much across the board internationally now an hour before the session starts, which some people hate. As a coach and someone who cares about healthy people, I'm a big fan of. I think the average person is sometimes led astray because where they see weigh-ins most of the time these days is boxing and UFC, which is often days out from the competition. So someone shows up and weighs in at 199.9 pounds, and then they walk in the ring at 235 pounds. And uh, I think my impression is that people have a very skewed view of what's possible and what's healthy and good for performance.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely a huge, even between a 2 1 hour weigh-in versus a 24-hour weigh-in. Some powerlifting federations are 24 hours, and that 24 hours really matters when we're talking about rehydration, right? So depending on which federation an athlete is competing in and how much time they have between weighing in and performing will dictate what we do as a cutting strategy, whether that be, you know, using diet as a cutting agent or using water cuts, like that matters because I would never want to jeopardize somebody who has a 2 hour weigh in with their performance by doing a strategy that should be for a 24-hour weigh in, if that makes sense.
That's exactly where I was going. And could you describe how different they are? Because for someone who's never gone through it, it probably doesn't sound like a big deal. Like, well, I weigh in 2 hours before, I weigh in the day before. I'm going to weigh about the same. What does it look like if you're working in those two different protocols?
So the biggest thing is going to be the water cut. Nutrition is only going to take you so far, depending on how much time you have. If you give yourself plenty of time, you can diet down like I did for my first with just nutrition alone and not even worry about water cuts. So the biggest difference comes in when we do a water cutting protocol. And the biggest thing is really the dehydration and rehydration portion of that. Because I had mentioned earlier that as little as 2% drop in body water can severely affect your performance, we can get away with a little bit more with a 24-hour weigh-in because you have 24 hours to refuel. And normally what I have those athletes do is do a refeed that day before. So I will purposely increase their calories, increase their carbs, we increase the water back up. You don't have that with a 2 hour weigh in. With a 2 hour weigh in, you step on the scale and then you step on the platform. And if you try to refeed like you would in a 24-hour weigh in,
Going
if
to
you
get
have a 2 hour weigh in,
uncomfortable.
you are going to be hating your life. It's going like you're not going to be able to refuel appropriately. So we really want to be mindful about how much water we are actually cutting depending on when you weigh in. Because if you have a 2 hour weigh in and you have 5 pounds of water to cut and you're somebody who doesn't cut 5 pounds of water like me, I'm just going to say, hey, you're not going to compete in the weight class that you want to compete in. And that's totally fine because I would rather you have a good meet and be injury free than try to do some, drastic cut to get you to weigh in and then you're suffering on the platform. So that's the biggest difference between 24 and 2 hour weigh-ins. It's how you cut and then how you refuel.
Yeah, and they're so different, and the experience is so different for people. I don't know where you stand. As a coach, I strongly prefer the 1 or 2 hour weigh in because the 24 to 48, you, in order to be competitive, people feel like they have to do some of the things you described. Well, I can get significantly dehydrated and run myself into the ground and then do a refeed and rehydration, which is true. There's maybe some long term effects from this kind of stuff. We're not 100% sure, but we don't think it's good for anyone. And we don't think it's something you should be doing on a very regular basis. So I sort of wish federations would do away with it, understanding that makes it's a different approach. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really hard to move things, especially when they've been in place for a long time. But certainly for health in general and what the fans see, I'm a big fan of, you know, I would do a weigh in before you step on the platform if it was up to me.
Mm-hmm. I actually, as a coach, I might have a skewed view because I know how to approach both. So I'm like, well, it doesn't matter, if you have a 2 hour or 24-hour weigh-in, this is how you would do it for this and this is how you do it for that. But that's because I'm a coach and I have competed as an athlete in both. I will say I think it's a little less stressful to have a 24-hour weigh-in only because you do have that window of refeed rehydration. However, I do agree with you that people feel like they can push harder with a 24-hour weigh-in. And that's not necessarily the case. Like you can, it comes down to strategy. You're using different strategies and different timing to get you to your goal, but you can push it on both, right? You can still do something so drastic and have a 24-hour weigh-in and still be suffering on the platform because what you did was, required more than 24 hours to recover from. And the same thing holds true with a 2-hour weigh-in. People don't realize how much body water affects performance. So they do a massive water cut and they're like, well, I made weight. Okay, let's go perform. And then it's not until after that they're like, well, my performance didn't go as well, or I got injured. That's the biggest thing is people will get injured on the platform because they underestimate how much your body goes through when you are dieting and doing a weight cut. And that's why the way that I approach dieting, even if we're in an off season and we want to just lose some weight, it's different than how lay people want to diet because we have that performance piece that we need to keep in mind. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
I think that's well said. And I agree, both can be done well and safely. Both have their advantages. I think my issue is the 24-hour window opens the door and kind of comes with more temptation to do
It does.
some weird and wild stuff and insert all kinds of bizarre thermogenics and goofy strategies where it's probably not the right way to go, but a bunch of people will, and influencers and companies will be in your ear about, ooh, we can actually take you down 30 pounds. Wouldn't it be so nice to walk
Yeah,
around so much heavier and not have to worry the rest of the year? That's where I kind of fall down on it. Do you work with anyone who doesn't compete?
I do. Yes, I do have a couple of clients that are just general health and fitness, or they were competing at one point and now they're kind of stepping back and transitioning.
How do you work with those people? Because I'm sure there's folks listening now saying, I want to be strong. Like that may be their North Star
Yeah.
for their training. They want to be strong. Maybe they love the big lifts, whatever their protocol is. I want to be really strong. I have no interest in competing or getting on a platform. It really is them against them.
Mhm.
What are your, of course, generalizing suggestions for someone like that?
So my suggestion would be, we're still taking things slow because normally people that want general health and fitness usually start because they want to lose weight. And anything that you do quickly will not stick around for the long run. So, you still want to be very mindful about your diet and diet down in a way that is sustainable. Because at the end of that, once you reach your goal weight, you want to be able to sustain that. So, start slow, still pay attention to your nutrition, right? We want adequate amount of protein. And since we are looking at still getting stronger, we have to also still prioritize carbs, which I feel like is something that kind of gets demonized in the health and fitness.
Still,
People don't
baffling.
understand that it's not the protein. And even some athletes are like, oh, I need to refuel or my post workout has to be protein heavy. Yes, protein's important, but your recovery comes from carbs. That's where you make or break your performance and even strength too, right? It's the refueling from the carbs. So prioritizing carbs, keeping fats low. We know that fat is mainly there for hormonal balance. So we do not need, to be supplementing a whole bunch of fat into our diet. And that's going to keep you a lot leaner too and give you that muscular look that you're likely going for. Um, Yep. So do that. Once you get down to your goal weight, then that's where we kind of switch to aesthetics. And to get stronger, you need more muscle. You can maximize. I'm always for maximizing your current muscle mass first. And that's where you spend a little bit of time at maintenance and focusing on training. And then once that runs its course, then we need to bulk back up, which is very scary for people because that means eating more and yes, gaining weight. So yeah, it's a whole. when we're talking about health, fitness, strength, we are going through different cycles of cutting, maintaining, bulking, depending on what the end goal is. And without bulking, we can't get stronger. There comes a time where the answer is not train more, it's eat more and build some more muscle.
Exactly. And those are three great points that are often hard to balance and people need to prioritize, the being weight, performance, and aesthetics. Like the number on the scale, the performance, whatever your goal is there, and what you look like. And one of those can kind of be your biggest priority at any given time. It's very hard to run with two. It's very hard
Mm-hmm.
to decide you have to be this weight and maximize performance. It's very hard to decide you're going to be this weight and have exactly the aesthetic you're going for. There's always trade-offs in there.
Absolutely. And for somebody who's not competing, I mean, I tell them, forget about how much you weigh. Like, the scale
Nice.
doesn't matter. It's about what you look. Because at the end of the day, people are actually going for a look. They say they want to lose weight and be X amount of pounds. But what they really want is to look good, which is totally, it's independent of what the scale says. Because we all know that muscle weighs more than fat. So if you have a lot more muscle mass, you're going to weigh more. So at some point, you have to let the number on the scale go. Now, if you're competing, we want to keep that in the back of our mind because of the weight classes and competition. But for somebody who just wants to get stronger and look good, sure, let's have the number on the scale be our first goal, right? Because that usually means shedding fat. But then at some point, you have to let that number go.
Yeah, I often draw the like my question is whenever someone says I want to be this number or I want to lose this number of pounds or something like that is, oh, well, what does that mean? What is it? What happens then? What do it look like? And then they start telling me what they actually mean. Well, when I do that, I'll feel like this or look like this or I'll have abs or I'll fit into the dress or I'll be able to do like, oh, great. Why don't we aim for those things? Why don't we completely ignore what the scale is and aim for those things? The scale is a useful metric for some people. Sometimes it drives them crazy. We might use it as a tool, but why don't we aim for the thing you actually want? Because it's very easy to hit your goal weight and not hit the goal you're actually after if we don't aim at the thing that we actually mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic approach. Um, yeah, because often at the end of the day, it's not the number on the scale that matters. It's usually
And
something else.
for aesthetics, because I can hear someone out there screaming that it doesn't matter. I usually say that if I talk to someone and they don't list aesthetics in like somewhere in their top four priorities, then I know I'm being lied to and I need to ask more questions.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're an athlete or just somebody general health and fitness, what prompts you is the fact that you usually don't like the way that you look. That's why people want to lose weight. It's not, it's usually not because the scale says something. It's because, like you said, they can't fit into the dress, which directly correlates to your appearance and your physique and what you
It
look
can also be the reason people want to gain weight and get stronger. And it might not be number
like.
one. It might be I've wanted to do a pull up my whole life and I'm going to get there. Great. Totally cool. What else? And we'll get to like,
Mhm.
oh, it'd be cool to have some arms and shoulders. Be like, great. Arms and shoulders will probably come along with this kind of training. But thank you for letting me know because if we get you a pull up and you're still unhappy and we haven't talked about this, I won't understand why you're unhappy.
Yeah. And a lot of people that have more performance goals, like, for example, strength athletes, right? Powerlifters,
Mhm.
usually they're not too hung up on aesthetics because you can be strong and not necessarily love the body that you're in. But they do have different goals.
Yeah, it's a
At
trade-off.
the end of the day, you still have aesthetics in the back of your mind because if you're strong, but now you have diabetes or you have heart disease. And something that I don't think I told you is that I'm also a nurse. I've been a nurse
Oh,
for 13 years. So there comes a time where yes, we're still focusing on performance, but if your health is being jeopardized and now your longevity in the sport is severely decreased or it's altered because you're on a medication that's banned, right? Now we have to also start looking at aesthetics and being like, okay, we actually have to lose weight because now you're just very unhealthy. So, although aesthetics might not be at the forefront of most strength athletes' mind, it does come into play at some point.
All the time. And for all of my, I mean, I've coached Olympic athletes, powerlifters, strongmen, CrossFitters. It's very common for us to have a big peak competitive season and then kind of a cutting aesthetics, have more fun season. And there's a balance in there. You can't be at peak competition strength, look, etc. all the time. And it's very hard to be a super competitive strength athlete and be incredibly lean and jacked without an enormous amount of pharmaceutical support.
Yes, agreed.
Do you ever do any coordination with you said you do everything but the training with most of your athletes. Do you coordinate with whoever's writing the training?
I do. I always tell the athlete that I'm more than happy to speak with their coach. Normally, what ends up happening is the athlete will tell me what their training protocol is. Oh, it's a deload week, or we're gearing up for a peak week. So I do have conversations around training to see how the nutrition has to be manipulated. I recently had one of my athletes that's been with me. He's a strongman athlete. He's been with me for over a year. He will he's very good about communicating with me where he's at in his training cycle. So like just recently we had a discussion about deload. He's like, well, I'm gonna deload next week, but I feel hungry, and he's probably about 3 to 4 pounds over where he needs to be, and we are, I think, 12 weeks out from his competition. So now
Okay.
I'm taking all these factors, right? Okay, we're 12
Yeah.
weeks out. You're about 4 pounds over. You're hungry, so we know that you're training more, like the nutrition, you're not being recovered effectively, but you're also going into a deload, which means you don't need as much calories because your training's being decreased. So we had a conversation around that. Like, okay, do we increase now? So what we ended up happening was we increased his macros to be able to subside the hunger. And I told him for his deload week, I always increase carbs on a training day. So a lot of people will take carbs away on a rest day. And right, because, oh, I'm not training, so I don't eat. But I actually calculate what they need and I just add on a training day. So although my athletes do have two different sets of macros, one for a rest day, one for a training day, and they are eating less carbs on a rest day, I'm not taking the training and taking it away. It's more like I'm taking the rest day and adding on the training. So I told him on your deload week, just eat rest day calories because you're not going to be training as much. And that's going to mitigate that, we increased calories. So weight might go up, not always. Um, Weight might go up because we're adding more carbs, and carbs help us retain water. So we might have some water shifting going on there. But we're also 12 weeks out. So I told him, I'm like, listen, let's take care of your hunger. Let's increase and kind of see where you're at in the next 2 weeks and then go from there. Because we have plenty of time to be able to cut 4 pounds.
And I don't know if everyone heard it, but that makes perfect sense to me. But it's a nuanced, balanced, individualized approach, taking everything about this person into effect. How they're recovered, what their training is like, what their goals are, they have a deadline, what their specific deadline timeline is for nailing this number and being in great shape. Knowing all of that, this was the decision. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, especially some newer coaches, nutrition types out there would hear, oh, well, my athlete's hungry. They must be in a calorie deficit because they're training. I'm just going to keep jacking up their calories up across the board, as opposed to what you described, which is this is going to be our approach for this week. And then we're going to see. And we're going to make some adjustments going forward.
Absolutely. My conversations with my athletes end up being a lot more frequent the closer we get to competition.
Yeah. How, do you let your athletes text you?
But we have a messaging app, so I kind of can separate all my messages. But yeah, I do allow them to message me whenever they want. I check my messages frequently. And I'm always glad to communicate with them. So they usually will just shoot me a message whenever they have something going on, or if I don't hear from them, then we usually just do a check-in, and we'll catch up there.
Yeah, I have a similar setup where there's messaging in the app, and that's my strong preference that they communicate there. But as we get closer and closer to a moment, whatever that moment is, you can just watch the message frequency rise until it's like whenever I
Yep.
look at my phone, there's going to be a message from them. So, and I'm not going to ignore them, but I'm going to make sure we do this on a measured basis because I know we're going to talk 50 times today, and that's totally appropriate for today.
Yep, absolutely.
That's so fun. I'm glad that's everyone's experience. Francesca, this has been lovely. I know you have some changes coming up. Are you still open to working with people? Because you're pursuing a
Yes,
doctorate coming up, correct?
I am. Yes, I
Yep.
am
That's
pursuing
so
my
cool.
doctorate in the actual degree is in kinesiology, but the track, the subspecialty is, of course, sports nutrition. So I'll be starting that in the fall. Really love what I do with my athletes, really love the nutrition aspect for performance. So it was kind of like a no-brainer when I found this program. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, we're doing it. And I already have my
That makes
master's, so I've already,
right.
pushed the graduate with the sports nutrition in mind. That I did even before I started coaching. That was
Mhm.
back in 2018.
Wow.
Yes, yeah.
So cool. So knowing that, tell people where they should go. Send people to where they should go to find you, find more about you, potentially get in touch if they want to work with you.
Yes. So my Instagram handle is Cheska. That's CHESKA _sports_nutrition, both on Instagram as well as TikTok. So I'm there mainly on those two platforms. So yeah, if I would love to have you over and reach out.
Perfect. We will put that in the show notes. You can reach down and press a button and start DMing away and get in touch with Francesca. Francesca, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin. This was really fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to the Feel Strong podcast. If you want to reach out about solving your fitness problems, find us on Instagram at FeelStrongFit or apply to get started now on our website, feelstrong.me. Subscribing, rating, and sharing this podcast is an enormous help and has more impact than you know. Thank you for doing that if you're able. If you feel stuck, if you know where you want to go but you aren't sure how to get there, reach out. It's what we do.